And now a moment from Your History and Health Comes First with Dr. Richard Brown.
Your History and Health Comes First by Dr. Richard Brown. Thanks for joining us again for this week's podcast. It is May 4th, 2022, and time is continuing to move fast as we enter the post-COVID period. It's already the 5th month of the year, and this weekend in Omaha was the site of the Warren Buffett Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholders meeting, which attracted more than 40,000 people from all over the world. It was the first in-person meeting that took place since 2019, before the pandemic took place. So there was lots of people here. The weather wasn't as great as it could have been. It was rainy, at least all day one day, and it was kind of gloomy. We did get sunshine one part of the weekend. So today I want to talk about something that's a bit controversial and confusing, probably to many. And sometimes I pick topics to talk about that maybe I don't understand as well as I should, or that's intriguing enough that I need to do research so I can figure out what's going on with it. And I enjoy that because I've pretty much prided myself on looking at complicated situations and analyzing it and breaking it down into smaller bites so that I can understand and so that other people can understand. And so that brings me to this week's topic, which has to do with this thing called Title 42. What is Title 42? Well, I know that the number 42, I believe, was Jackie Robinson's number. That number sticks in my mind, I think, for that reason. But Title 42 has been on the news and in the mouths of politicians and commentators and other people for several weeks now, although it's been around for almost a year. But this information I'm going to talk about comes from the American Immigration Council, and it's entitled The Guide to Title 42 Expulsion at the Border. So when we talk about Title 42, we have to talk about something called asylum. We certainly have heard the word asylum before and probably have a general idea as to what asylum is. But I'm going to give you some specifics on what asylum really means in the United States. So asylum is the legal protection afforded by the United States government to a person who has demonstrated a well-founded fear of persecution based upon race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So asylees are distinguished from refugees, which is another group, by their presence in the country. So they, the asylees, are seeking protection from deportation after having entered the United States, legally or illegally. So the opportunity to apply for asylum is afforded to both refugees and asylees if they're outside the United States, or even if they've already entered the United States illegally. So those who can demonstrate a credible fear of returning to their home country due to past persecution based upon these 5 protective grounds that I mentioned, which is race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So they may receive status in the United States that is called asylum. However, this status is not guaranteed, but it's a great possibility that it can be achieved under normal circumstances. So the United States have long given this right to people that show up at our southern borders and protect them. But since March 2020, this fundamental right has been largely suspended. Since that date, both migrants seeking a better life in the United States and those who are applying for asylum have been turned away and expelled back to Mexico or their home countries. Now, these border expulsions are carried out under a little known provision by the U.S. Health Law Section 265 of Title 42, which the former Trump administration invoked to achieve its long desired goal of shutting the borders. I think we're pretty much aware that Trump wanted to shut the borders down. He ran on that campaign. He's going to build the wall, build the wall. We heard that over and over for months and months and months. So it's clear that he wanted to shut down the border. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has continued to use this provision, and over 1.2 million expulsions have been carried out since the pandemic began. Even though the ports in parts of the country were still open to nearly 11 million people crossing the southern border just about every month, and many people flying into the United States every day. So the Centers for Disease Control, despite their claim that this order was necessary when Trump issued it to protect the United States from a public health perspective, they have shown that the origin of this policy really came from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Trump White House. So public reporting indicates that when Title 42 was originally created, the CDC scientists expressed opposition to this innovation of the invocation of the Title 42, arguing that there was no public health rationale to support it. Ever since then, public health experts outside of the CDC have continued to agree, arguing that while international borders remain largely open to other travelers, there is no need to turn away refugees and expel them to their home countries or to Mexico. So that's where it gets controversial. Since taking office, the Biden administration has continued to insist that Title 42 is necessary for public health purposes, despite the widespread availability of tests and vaccination for COVID-19. There have been federal courts that have rejected the legal basis for the use of Title 42 to expel individuals who have entered the United States. There have been multiple federal judges that have ruled that the law does not permit expulsion and instead only gives the government the authority to turn away people who have not yet entered the United States or impose quarantine for those already inside the United States. So the law was supposed to be able to turn people away or put people in quarantine who are already in the United States if indeed their presence constituted a threat to public health. Did not supposed to include expulsion back to another country or to their countries of origin, only to just turn them away and or to put them in quarantine if they pose a threat to the public health of the citizens of the United States. So decisions blocking the use of Title 42 against unaccompanied children, as well as migrants who have arrived with families, are currently in appeal. So if children who came to the southern border wanting to get in and they were minors, they didn't have parents with them, they were alone, then you weren't supposed to send them back or turn them away. But that even is in existence still. And there's many courts that have appealed this decision because they think it's pretty bad to be turning children away at the border if they're there without any parents. So what is Title 42 and how did it go into place? So as I mentioned, March 20th, 2020, Department of Health and Human Services issued an emergency regulation to implement a specific aspect of U.S. health law. And this is 265 code, Title 42. And it allows the Center for Disease to prohibit the introduction into the United States of individuals when the director believes that there is serious danger of the introduction of a communicable disease. And so, as you may recall, there's been some movement to, specifically in this town, Omaha, to remove the authority of the director of public health to make decisions about the health of the public, communicable diseases and all, without the consent and or must have the approval of the city council. Clearly a movement to take the authority out of the hands of the expert and put it into the hands of a politician. So at the CDC government level, we have a similar concern there. And there's people who do not wish for the Center for Disease Control to have that kind of authority. And they vilified the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which have kept us alive and well for hundreds of years now, and vilified Fauci as well because he was the major spokesman. So this rule allows the customs officers at the border to turn people away. And so they have done so. But the way it's being implemented is kind of controversial. Under the agreement reached by the Mexican government back in March of 2020, the Mexican government agreed that the Border Patrol could begin sending Mexican, Guatemalan, Honduran, and Salvadorian families and single adults to Mexico. As they turn them away, they could send them to Mexico. And despite this agreement, there has been extensive documentation of individuals expelled to Mexico who do not fit within this category, including the Haitian asylum seekers. And this is where there's been significant controversy because the Haitians have been turned away at the border and sent to Mexico in many cases, and they have no affiliation with Mexico. So they've been taking people and expelling them by usually driving them in a bus, putting them in a bus and driving them to the nearest port of entry and asking them to walk to Mexico with their luggages and their belongings. And even since January 2021, the Mexican state at the border, Tamaulipas, who's the southern border of Texas, has barred the Border Patrol from expelling families with children under the age of 7. And in response, the Border Control says, okay, well, this is what we'll do. We'll transfer these people by plane or bus to other locations along the border, such as El Paso, where Mexican authorities will allow the agency to expel families with young children. But because of this capacity to carry out these lateral flights, it's limited the Border Patrol to be able to do this, fairly. So they're releasing a majority of the family who crossed the border into South Texas. And despite Biden's insistence that he would expel all the families if he could. So this is what people are up in arms about. Many of the people showing up at the border are supposed to be turned away according to the current Title 42, but many of them are ending up at the border, along the Mexican border, just along the southern Texas border, and many of them are getting into the United States by one way or another, thus negating the whole Title 42 provision that was put in place. Now, there's another aspect of this Title 42. If those people that present themselves at the border and seeking asylum determine, or at least they give a reasonable story or convince the Border Patrol that they will be tortured if they're returned to their country that they came from, then an exception is being made and they won't be sent back. So if indeed the official screening by the asylum officers at the border do not get a chance to talk to these people, the people don't get a chance to give them a reasonable explanation about the fact that they will be tortured, then they're sent back anyway. So from March 2020 through September 21st of 2021, there was only about 3,217 people that were screened for the torture provision prior to being sent back or expelled. Only 272 people were taken out of the Title 42 and permitted to seek asylum. Now that's out of thousands and thousands of people. So those who are not sent to Mexico are held in immigration customs enforcement units. That's ICE, as you may have heard. This is a detention center. And they're held there, or in some cases, they're flown back to their home countries. And they don't have the opportunity to even seek asylum. There's been lots of flights have gone back to Haiti as well. And you may recall Border Patrol on horseback with whips chasing after the Haitians to rid them from their presence at the border, which was outrageous. So Haitian families seeking asylum have been subject to this process and returned to Haiti in a time when clearly there was enough uprising and punishment with the assassination of their president taking place. So once Biden got into office, though, there was an outrage associated with that. And so sending the Haitian people back to their country was suspended. And there were also a number of congressmen, Democratic Congress members, upset about that. And so this was suspended for a while. There were other national organizations, the United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees was up in arms about this practice. And so that did get suspended. And as far as I know at this point, has not resumed, but still they aren't being allowed into the United States. So as part of the Title 42 provision, the Border Patrol also stopped processing all asylum seekers who arrive at ports of entry who are there for humanitarian protection. This led to nearly 15,000 people who had been waiting on lists for an opportunity to request an asylum at the ports of entry to be left in limbo. So before this practice came about to expel unaccompanied children was blocked in the courts and then later formally ended by the Biden administration, the Border Patrol used Title 42 to turn away and expel nearly 16,000 unaccompanied children, despite provisions of the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act. So there was a TVPR Act, Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which required the government to protect children who arrive at the border without a parent or legal guardian. So through the end of August 2021, the Border Patrol has carried out more than 1.13 million expulsions, meaning that they not only turned them away, but actually sent them away to their countries of origin through bus or plane or however means they could make that happen. So thousands have been subject to this expedited removal and sent back to their places of origin, or sent to ICE detention. So about 1 in 10 people who encounter trying to cross the border with unaccompanied children are sent to shelters. And according to the data, not more than a third of the people who have tried to come in have been released on the borders and left to stay around to, I guess, be a problem for those who want them here. So what do the public experts say about Title 42? So despite the claim that Title 42 is needed to protect against the spread of COVID-19, many public health experts have called for an end to this practice of border expulsions. Okay. The public leaders have called on the CDC to lift the order. According to experts, the fundamental problem with Title 42 expulsions is that they are targeting primarily a small group of people who are seeking asylum at a time when the restrictions placed at ports of entry still allow large numbers of people to cross the border. In fact, despite the existence of limitations at the border of entry on non-essential travel, hundreds of thousands of people cross the border daily from Mexico into the United States through ports of entry. Nearly 11 million people in June 2021 alone. So in a letter to the Biden administration last September, public experts noted that the risk of infection from the Delta variant could be mitigated at the border with social distancing, provided appropriate personnel, protective equipment, ensuring frequent testing, and offering vaccination to immigrants. The experts continue to assert that Title 40 expulsions themselves could pose a public health threat, as people are detained together for days and weeks prior to transporting them for expulsion. So what we have is that the Trump administration imposed Title 42 to block the borders, to cut off the borders, to shut off the borders in the name of the fact that it was a threat to public health. And at the time, CDC supported it. But since then, CDC does not support it because we have the vaccination. We know more about how the disease works. We can use social distancing. We can use masks. We can use all of the protective equipment that we have now. And so it is not a threat anymore, the people at the border coming in, except that now that we're sending them to ICE and into camps and holding them together for days and days and weeks, this could cause a potential danger to, again, the immigrants as well as the United States population, because we're holding them together, not social distancing necessarily, and maybe not getting vaccinations to all of them. So we're creating another problem. So the problem is compounding, which makes it complicated and a bit confusing. So in response to this concern, the Biden administration has said that asylum seekers should continue to wait until the new administration can restore humanitarian processes and increase their capacity at the border, citing the destruction to the system carried out under the former President Trump. So the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, declared that asylum seekers need to wait. They just need to wait, adding that we're not saying don't come. We're saying don't come now because we will be able to deliver a safe and orderly process to them as quickly as possible. As soon as that is done and they figure that out, then they're saying, okay, you may come. But there's still people saying that, wait a minute, that's still a lot of people that are going to be coming to our borders, which both some Democrats and Republicans do not like, and other people who may not be affiliated with the left or the right, they're still concerned about so many people coming to the borders and being given asylum. So it has been known that those asylum seekers who are turned away and sent to Mexico and other countries at the border, below the border, have suffered significant violence and extortion. And they've documented this in surveys. Over 6,300 reports of violence against migrants expelled back to Mexico under Title 42 has been documented. And so hundreds of parents fearing for their lives and their children have chosen to self-separate, sending their children across the border alone, knowing they'll be safe in the United States rather than in northern Mexico. So because there's the idiosyncrasies and twists in this law, it has caused adults, parents, to send their kids forward to seek asylum because they know they will not be sent back. And so it's a mess, as some people would call it. So where the Mexican government then, when they are sent back to Mexico, they expel them back to Guatemala, back to Honduras and other places, Salvador. And so it's a real problem, even for Mexico. So Mexico has said that they will not allow the Biden administration to expel them back to Mexico. So they're saying, you know, you guys need to stop doing that. And again, when they're sent to ICE during Biden's administration and to these detention centers, it creates a problem for all involved, the migrants, the immigrants from Mexico, for the United States, for the left, for the right. And so it's a bit controversial. It's a bit confusing. So I hope that I've been able to explain it somewhat so that you can understand a bit about what's happening. And it will continue. It's still going on. Before the pandemic began, just 7% of people arrested at the border had crossed the border more than once. But by October of 2020, which was toward the end of the beginning of the pandemic, nearly 40% of all people arrested at the border had been arrested multiple times. So this whole situation poses a real dilemma. How will the U.S. accommodate the number of people coming across the border when there are already thousands of people already in the United States who are suffering from poverty and racial discrimination and other human conditions that are deplorable and unacceptable? You know, will this influx of immigrants help fill the job gap and help with inflation or lower gas prices? These are questions. The impact is unknown. History will give us the answer, though. We must all watch to see that the health of the United States citizens and people who are here, as well as the immigrants, are protected. For we all are in this together. We all are in the same boat. May not be in the same oceans necessarily, but we're all in a same boat that is floating. And unless we're all are protected, cared for, then we're all are subject to destruction. So until next time, your health and history comes first. And we'll see you then. This is Dr. Richard Brown. Until next time, thank you.
This has been Your History and Health Comes First with Dr. Richard Brown. And you can leave suggestions at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.